Welcome back, everyone. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining me for today's Explainer, because we're about to unpack one of the most terrifying, edge-of-your-seat scenarios you could ever imagine, losing absolutely all aircraft controls right in the middle of a flight. Okay, let's dive into this. Seriously, just think about that for a second. How do you fly a massive commercial airliner when the steering wheel does literally nothing? To find out, we're jumping straight into the cockpit of United Airlines Flight 232. Picture this. It's July 19, 1989. The plane is cruising comfortably over the flat, clear skies of Iowa. The autopilot is on, the passengers are kicking back and relaxing. And then, boom! Out of nowhere, this massive, violent jolt rocks the entire aircraft.
Part 1. The Impossible Emergency.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how quickly a seemingly minor, totally invisible defect can spiral into an absolute disaster. What started as a completely routine DC-10 flight for Captain Alfred Haynes suddenly turned into a nightmare when the crew heard an explosive bang coming from the back of the plane. The flight engineer checks the systems and, yep, their worst fear is confirmed. The rear engine, the one mounted right at the base of the tail fin, has completely exploded. You see, deep inside that engine, a fan disc made from slightly impure metal had been developing this microscopic crack over countless flights. On Flight 232, it finally shatters. The explosion shuts down the engine, sure, but it's the shrapnel that really seals their fate. Metal pieces tear through the tail section, violently severing all three of the plane's independent, redundant hydraulic lines. Just like that, the aircraft starts bleeding out all its hydraulic pressure.
Section 2. Losing all control.
Now, losing one engine is definitely bad, but a DC-10 is actually designed to fly perfectly fine on just two. Losing all control, though, that's usually a death sentence. The crew quickly realizes that turning the control column does absolutely nothing. The plane stops responding entirely and starts a slow, irreversible bank to the right. If that bank keeps going, the plane rolls completely over and there is zero chance of recovery from that. To understand why they were so helpless, you kind of have to look at how these massive jets actually steer. Hydraulic fluid is this highly pressurized liquid that basically acts as the airplane's muscle. When a pilot turns the wheel left, that pressurized fluid physically pushes the control surfaces, like the ailerons on the wings, against the immense force of the rushing wind. So no fluid, no pressure. The pilots can yank that control column all day long, but the ailerons simply won't budge. They are completely, utterly trapped.
Meanwhile, back in the passenger cabin, an off-duty pilot notices the flight attendants gearing up for an emergency. His name is Dennis Fitch. And get this, he happens to be a flight instructor specifically for the DC-10. He offers to help and is brought up to the cockpit. When Captain Haynes tells them they've lost all hydraulics, Fitch is immediately horrified. He knows the DC-10 inside and out, so he knows the odds of losing all three independent lines are something crazy, like 1 in a billion. But what's even more terrifying, he knows they're likely doomed, because he remembers exactly what happened the last time a plane suffered this exact failure.
Part 3. The Doomed Precedent.
To really grasp Fitch's horror, we've got to rewind exactly 4 years to 1985. The doomed precedent he's thinking of is Japan Airlines Flight 123. This was a Boeing 747 SR, which was structurally modified to pack a staggering 524 people on board for short, busy domestic routes from Tokyo to Osaka. The nightmare for Flight 123 didn't actually start in the air. It started years earlier on the ground, during a hard landing that struck the tail. Mechanics repaired the critical pressure bulkhead, that's the seal keeping the cabin pressurized, but they made a fatal error. Instead of using one solid splice plate to carry all that intense stress, they improperly used two separate plates. Over years of takeoffs and landings, this caused extreme metal fatigue. Just 12 minutes into Flight 123, that bulkhead finally ruptured. It caused a massive explosive decompression that literally blew the entire vertical tail fin right off the airplane and instantly severed all of its hydraulic lines.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the terrifying physics of what happened next, which are almost unimaginable. Without a tail fin and without hydraulics, Flight 123 entered what's called a phugoid motion. It is this completely uncontrolled, sickening wave pattern. As the nose drops, the plane speeds up. That extra speed creates more lift under the wings, which then violently throws the nose back up into a climb. Then, the plane slows down, loses lift, and drops again. Over and over, just continuously.
The Japanese crew fought this relentless phugoid motion for 30 agonizing minutes, using only engine thrust to steer, but they were fighting a completely unwinnable battle. If you compare the conditions, JL-123 was over the treacherous, jagged peaks of the Japanese Alps, and they were missing their entire vertical stabilizer. That made controlled flight physically impossible.
Flight 232, on the other hand, at least had an intact tail and the flat Iowa cornfields below them. Tragically, JAL-123 eventually lost its battle, crashing into a mountain ridge just north of Mount McCooney.
Section 4. Steering without hydraulics.
Snapping right back to our present emergency in 1989, Dennis Fitch brings those heavy, devastating lessons of Japan Airlines Flight 123 straight into Captain Haynes' cockpit. They knew they had to try what the JAL crew attempted, steering a massive commercial airliner without a steering wheel. The only way to do that? Differential engine thrust. With the traditional controls completely dead, engine power is literally the only tool they have left. By pulling back power on the left engine, they can force the rightward drifting plane to level out. To actually force a turn, they have to carefully push one engine up and pull the other down. So Fitch steps up. He stands right between the captain and the first officer with a throttle lever in each hand. Together, they basically form a human computer, solving this high-stakes physics puzzle in real time. Fitch is manipulating the throttles based entirely on visual cues out the window and the shouted commands from the pilots.
Part 5. The Sioux City Landing.
Operating as this incredibly synchronized unit, the crew managed to wrestle the heavy, broken jet into a continuous right-hand corkscrew pattern. With over 400 miles left to Chicago, they realized there was no way they were going to make it. Air traffic control vectored them toward an airport less than 100 miles away in Sioux City, Iowa. Knowing that their control over the aircraft was hanging by a literal thread, Captain Alfred Haynes radioed air traffic control with a simple, chilling request. Quote, "Whatever you do, keep us away from the city." It's just a profound moment of selflessness. The crew knows they are bringing a heavy, fuel-laden bomb toward a populated area, and they are fully prepared to sacrifice themselves in a field rather than risk crashing into the homes of Sioux City.
And while the pilots are fiercely battling the physics of the aircraft, a deeply emotional scene is unfolding back in the passenger cabin. By a really heartbreaking twist of fate, this flight was part of a Children's Day promotion where kids could fly for just a single penny. There are 52 minors on board, many of them traveling completely alone. Flight attendants and adult passengers are scrambling to make sure no child sits by themselves. For the 4 infants on board who are too young for their own seats, the crew has no choice but to follow standard procedure, having parents place them on the hard cabin floor, surrounded by pillows, bracing for an incredibly violent impact.
Finally, the Sioux City airport comes into view, but the danger is far from over. Because they have no hydraulics, they cannot extend the flaps on the wings, and flaps are essential for creating drag and allowing a plane to fly slowly enough to land safely. Without them, Flight 232 is screaming toward the ground at more than double its normal landing speed. The crew quickly realizes they aren't lined up for the active runway they intended, but miraculously, their uncontrolled drift has aligned them almost perfectly with runway 222, which was a closed runway right in front of them. In the final seconds, just feet above the ground, the plane's right wing dips violently, strikes the tarmac, and sends the massive aircraft cartwheeling into a devastating fireball.
The emergency responders rushing into those fiery cornfields fully expected total devastation. They were fearing a terrifying repeat of the Japan Airlines tragedy. But then a miracle happened. Passengers actually started streaming out of the smoke. Out of that absolute inferno, 183 people survived the Sioux City crash. And even more astoundingly, after 40 minutes of searching the wreckage, rescuers found the completely crushed, separated cockpit. Inside, miraculously, Captain Haynes, the co-pilot, the flight engineer, and Dennis Fitch were all found alive.
Section 6. Lessons from Tragedy.
You know, they say aviation safety is written in blood, and the overarching lessons extracted from both of these impossible situations permanently transformed the way we fly today. The miraculous survival rate in Sioux City is even more poignant when you contrast it with the stark, devastating reality of Japan Airlines Flight 123. That crash resulted in 520 fatalities. To this day, it remains the deadliest single-plane crash in aviation history. The JAL disaster wasn't just a catastrophic loss of structural integrity, it was heavily compounded by a tragic 14-hour delay in rescue operations due to the remote mountain terrain. It was a delay where doctors later confirmed even more lives could have been saved with a faster response.
So the crucial point is this: United 232 didn't just get lucky. Their incredible survival was the flawless, real-world execution of a paradigm shift in aviation called Crew Resource Management, or CRM. Before CRM, the captain was essentially an unquestioned authority in the cockpit. which honestly often led to rigid hierarchies and tragic communication failures. But on Flight 232, we saw the exact opposite. We saw a captain willingly hand over control to a passenger who just happened to be an instructor. We saw a co-pilot, an engineer, and a captain constantly sharing inputs without an ounce of ego. They communicated flawlessly under the most extreme pressure imaginable. They proved that absolute teamwork transforms survivability.
Which leaves us with a really profound question to reflect on the next time you board a commercial flight. If the ultimate test of a pilot isn't simply their ability to manually steer the plane, but their ability to communicate and collaborate when the totally impossible happens, how many lives does that invisible, seamless teamwork save every single day in the skies above us? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating explainer with me. Stay curious, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next one.